The Kim family struggles to survive in a cramped semi-basement apartment in Seoul. In order to make ends meet, Father Ki-taek, Mother Chung-suk, daughter Ki-young, and son Ki-woo fold pizza boxes for a pitiful wage. They even go so far as to leave their windows open so that the fumigator's poison smoke can enter the house and kill the bugs, even though they might end up inhaling it themselves, or use their phones next to the bathroom window to steal Wi-Fi. One evening, Ki-friend Woo's Min-hyuk pays them a visit and brings them a scholar's rock from his grandfather's collection that is supposed to be an amulet for prosperity. Additionally, he offers Ki-woo a job, asking him to take over tutoring Hyuks of a very wealthy family's daughter since Min-hyuk will soon be traveling abroad. After serving in the military for several years and taking the university entrance exam 4 times, Ki-woo has solid English skills. Since she is skilled in design software, Ki-young can simply fabricate his documents to appear to be a university student. Since his employers aren't likely to scrutinize them, having Min recommendation Hyuks should suffice. Ki-woo arrives at the Park family's residence in the affluent area of the city dressed to the nines and carrying the fake document. Duke Moon-gwang, the housekeeper, grants him access, and Choi In-jo, also known as Mrs. Park, conducts the interview. As expected, she pays little attention to the paperwork and relies solely on Minward, Hyuks, but she still wants to sit through the first lesson to make sure Ki-woo is a decent, upright man. Da-hai, the daughter Ki-woo will be instructing, initially reacts angrily when Ki-woo suddenly grabs her wrist, but she soon warms up to him because she realizes that it's just a gesture to comfort her when she's having trouble understanding the exercise. Mrs. Park decides to hire Ki-woo and pay him well after being pleased with what she has seen. He also gets to meet her son, Da-song, who has joined the Scouts and is crazy about playing Indians. After the first lesson, as a former Scout himself, Ki-woo demonstrates understanding, and when Mrs. Park shows him the drawings of her son, Ki-woo has an epiphany. Ki-woo suggests his cousin's classmate Jessica, a highly skilled art therapist, when Mrs. Park mentions she needs a new art teacher because none of the previous ones lasted longer than a month. He starts talking about their artwork songs as though it were truly a masterpiece. In reality, he's referring to his sister, who also appears for an interview the following day under the guise of being this Jessica teacher after having recently read articles about art therapy and psychology online. Ki-woo tutors Da-hai, who is envious of Ki-friendship woos with the art teacher, while Mrs. Park speaks to her. After reassuring her that he is not interested in her, Ki-woo gives her a kiss. When she returns to Ki-young, she persuades Mrs. Park to allow her to teach Da-song his first lesson by herself, and by the lesson's conclusion, she impresses her by demonstrating to her how well-behaved her son has become. She also mentions an incident that happened to Da-song in first grade while displaying Mrs. Park's traumatized appearance in his paintings. Mrs. Park hires Ki-young at a competitive salary after concluding that her son needs art therapy. She also runs into the family's father Park Dong-ik later that day, who offers his chauffeur Yoon to take her home. Yoon wants to take her home, but she asks him to leave her at the train station because she has a meeting. She does this because she wants to maintain the lie that she lives in a poor neighborhood. Ki-young has an idea while driving and gets her underwear out to put them in the trunk. As they prepare for their next move, the Kim family starts eating better as a result of their children's increased wages. Mr. Park discovers Yoon's underwear in the car and surmises that Yoon has been having affairs there and may have even been using drugs, as no sane person would ever leave their underwear in a moving vehicle. Mrs. Park asks Ki-young about the driver when she leaves after class and uses the opportunity to explain how Yoon attempted to take her home rather than the station. Mrs. Park decides to fire Yoon with the justification that they don't want to cause a scandal. Ki-young steps in and suggests her uncle's former driver, saying a mature employee is more trustworthy. Of course, it turns out that this man is Ki-taek, who once worked as a chauffeur. He takes Mr. Park for a test drive, who is impressed by his politeness and his in-depth familiarity with the area that allows him to find his destination without the aid of a GPS. Mr. Park hires him right away because of how skillfully he drives. He doesn't even spill his drink when the car turns. The hardest part of the plan is the final step because Moon-gwang, a crafty and obstinate woman who has worked in the house since it was owned by a previous family, has been there all along. Da-hai informs Ki-woo that peaches are prohibited in the home due to moon allergy. Gwang's so when she isn't looking, he and Ki-young start hurling peach fuzz at her. Since she doesn't think it's an allergy, Moon-gwang decides to visit the doctor for a checkup. Ki-taek joins her as part of the plan. Moon-gwang is placed in the background of a selfie that he takes, which he then shows to Mrs. Park while informing her that he overheard Moon-gwang say she has tuberculosis. He uses ketchup to make it appear as though Moon-gwang coughed up blood on the tissues in the trash when she starts coughing at home due to her allergies. Mrs. Park, who is embarrassed to have a sick employee at home, asks Ki-taek to promise he won't tell her husband about it before firing Moon-gwang and telling Mr. Park she resigned. As Mr. Park becomes concerned about the lack of cooking and cleaning in the home, Ki-taik gives him the business card of an esteemed company where he nearly found employment, allowing Mr. Park to tell his wife where he got the idea. This company claims to match families with dependable employees, but in reality, it's just another Kim family ploy. When Mrs. Park calls, she poses as a secretary and requests a ton of official paperwork using the phone on the card, which is a second number Ki-young obtained specifically for this. The Kim family eventually moves in after Chung-suk is hired as the new housekeeper. When Da-sung remarks that they all have the same smell, they realize it isn't the soap but rather the odor of their run-down, old apartment. The entire Kim family comes over to stay for a while after the Parks depart on a camping trip and leave Chung-suk in charge of the house. They eat all the food, drink the pricey wines, and Kyu even steals Dar Diary Highs to read because he wants to pop the question to her once she enrolls in college. Ice storm is raging outside as the Kims are eating dinner and daydreaming about what it would be like to marry into a wealthy family when suddenly the doorbell rings. It's Moon Gwang, who claims that after being fired, she hurriedly left and forgot something in the basement. Chung-suk lets her in while her family hides, but since Moon Gwang is taking too long down there, Chung-suk goes to investigate. When she helps Moon Gwang move a cabinet after finding her struggling to do so, a door leading to an underground bunker built by the architect and previous owner is revealed behind the cabinet. Oh Gyun-sai, Moon husband, Gwang's has been residing there for years in order to avoid loan sharks. When the previous owner left and the house was waiting to be sold, Moon Gwang assisted him in moving there, and the Parks were unaware of the bunker. When the Parks weren't looking, Moon Gwang would sneak in some food for him down there, which explains why Mr. Park believed she was overeating. She came today because she was aware that the Parks would be gone and wanted to speak privately with Chung-suk to request permission for her husband to continue to reside there. He would even be willing to pay her for bringing him food. When Chung-suk pulls out her phone to call the police in protest, her family accidentally falls off the stairs while trying to spy on them. Without wasting any time, Moon Gwang records them using her phone, capturing on film the fact that they call each other by their families. Now that Moon Gwang and her husband are in charge, they have the Kims' compliance by threatening to reveal their ruse to the Parks if they don't. The Kims are forced to crouch in a corner while Moon Gwang and Gyun-sai explore the home as they all head upstairs. When Moon Gwang and her husband use the home while the Parks were away, they would always be respectful of the architect's artistic touch, which is why she even calls them out for being pigs and making a mess in the living room. The Kims take advantage of the opportunity to attack the couch and wrestle the couple to the ground for the phone while she is giving them such a speech. In order to knock out Moon Gwang, Ki-taik grabs Gyun-sai and Kyung throws a bunch of peaches at her. Ki-woo then takes the phone and deletes the recording. Everyone stops moving when they hear the house phone ring. When Chung-suk picks it up, she is startled to hear Mrs. Park asking her to prepare dinner because they will be returning earlier than planned because of the storm that prevented them from continuing their camping trip. The moment she ends the call, the entire family takes immediate action. Cooking starts with Chung-suk. Gyun-sai is taken to the basement and restrained by Ki-taik. Kyung stows away the trash under the furniture, and Ki-woo returns the diary from the second floor after taking an unconscious Moon Gwang with him. Ki-woo hides under their bedhighs as the Parks return at that precise moment, and Kyung rolls under the table. When Moon Gwang awakens and makes an attempt to leave, Chung-suk pushes her back into the basement, causing her to stumble and suffer a head injury. Ki-taik drags her lifeless body to where her husband is pinning a Morse code chart on the wall and banging his head against the light switches. Da-sung believes that because he is a scout, he will one day see his message, but Ki-taik thinks the idea is absurd before tying him to a pipe and leaving. While having dinner upstairs, Mrs. Park shares with Chung-suk about terrifying Song's first grade incident. One night, the boy sneaked into the kitchen to steal his birthday cake and saw a ghost who was actually Gyun-sai coming from the basement. Due to the convulsions and mouth foaming that resulted from this, they have never been home for his birthday and he has been receiving therapy ever since. Da-hai nearly discovers Ki-woo under the bed, but thankfully she picks up her dog and decides not to look any further. In order to leave after the Park couple retires to their bedroom, Ki-woo and Ki-taik sneak into the living room to find Kyung. However, when Da-sung suddenly yells and descends the stairs, the three of them are forced to hide under the table. It turns out that Dar parents Songs agreed to let him camp out in the garden in the rain while choosing to sleep on the couch to keep an eye on him. The Kims are now forced to listen to the Parks whine about how bad they smell and act flirtatious with one another. The Kims leave the house once the couple has finally fallen asleep and run through the rain towards their neighborhood, which is filling with sewage water. They gather as many belongings as they can before leaving their apartment, which is also flooded, to spend the night in a nearby gym that welcomes disadvantaged people who have lost their homes to the storm. Since his father doesn't have a plan to handle the issue they left in the basement, Ki-woo brought the scholar's rock with him and hugs it while he sleeps. Moon Gwang passes away from the concussion she suffered earlier back in the bunker, and Gyun-sai tries to use the lights to send a Morse code message for assistance. Dasong observes it and interprets it, but it is absurd. Gyun-sai spells incorrectly because he is too drunk to think clearly, which only results in a bloody forehead. The Kims are forced to put on their friendliest faces even though they are truly feeling devastated after losing their home when Mrs. Park decides to throw an impromptu party for Da birthday songs the following day. The siblings must put on their smart teacher personas because they have been invited to the party as very important guests, while Chung-suk must cook and set up the tables outside. Ki-taek must drive the parents around to buy all the party supplies while they keep making faces at his smell. Mr. Park and Ki-taek dress up as Indians during the celebration because they have an act planned for Darsun to save his cake. Ki-woo leaves Dahai after spending some time with her and goes downstairs with the scholar's rock only to be jumped on by Gyun-sai, who has somehow managed to free himself. Gyun-sai knocks him out with the rock and uses a cord around Ki-naek-woo's to stop him from running. He then exits the bunker and heads to the garden party while grabbing a knife from the kitchen. Gyun-sai rushes outside and stabs Ki-young in an effort to exact revenge on Moon-gwang. As soon as Darsong sees him, he starts to have a seizure, and Dahai finds Ki-body-woos and carries him outside to call for assistance. In the meantime, Chung-suk jumps on Gyun-sai and kills him with a barbecue skewer. Ki-taek goes to check on her daughter while trying to keep a hand on her wound to stop it from bleeding. Mr. Park asks Ki-taek to drive him because he doesn't care about any of his workers and just needs to get his son to the hospital. However, Ki-taek throws the keys at him so he can drive himself because he doesn't want to leave his family. The moment the keys hit the grass, Gyun-sai collapses on top of them. Even in this life-threatening emergency, Mr. Park covers his nose while moving the body as he goes to get them. Ki-taek grabs the knife out of rage and kills Mr. Park before running away from the scene. Ki-woo awakens from brain surgery a few weeks later. He is unable to stop laughing as a result of the injury and procedure that have left his mind in a fragile state. He learns that his sister is dead and that his father is missing, is arrested, is put on trial for fraud, and is eventually allowed to leave on probation due to the traumatic incident that they aren't charged with because it was in self-defense. The news report showing the now empty house that makes everything that happened seem more real causes him to stop laughing. He and his mother don't know where his father is, but the detectives continue to follow them in the hopes that they will lead them to him. Months later, when the police stop pursuing them and the news has finally moved on to other topics, Ki-woo climbs the mountain to spy on the Park's home, which is now occupied by a German family who purchased it without knowing its past. Ki-woo discovers that his father, who has been hiding all this time in the home bunker, is using the lights there to send a message in Morse code. He has buried Moon-gwang in the backyard and forages for food every evening to stay alive, in the hopes that his son will one day read them. He also sends the Moss messages every day. Ki-woo writes a letter to his father from his old apartment, which he still resides in with his mother, promising to put in a lot of effort and save up money so they can one day buy a home together. Thank you for watching. Why don't you consider subscribing while you're here? We have the best recaps around and would love to have you part of our community. Thank you and see you in the next one.